The topic for today's lecture is basically the argument from memory. And it's an argument for the existence of the self that you find over and over in the Hindu tradition. The Hindus don't give up on it, and the Buddhists don't stop criticizing it. So this argument gets attention for, if you like, a few centuries. So I gave you an early version of the Nyaya argument last time. We'll go through that again and then look at the Buddhist criticism. But the strongest version of the memory argument comes from a different school, the Mamatha School. So the Mamatha School takes the Buddhist criticism very seriously. They think that the Nyaya argument cannot stand up to the Buddhist criticism, and so they try and answer or configure the argument in response to the Buddhist criticism. So that's what I really want you to do today. We look at the Nyaya argument again. We understand why the Buddhists are worried about it. We go to the Mimamsa version of the argument, and then we evaluate the Mimamsa version of the argument and see whether it really works. So just a bit of history on the Mimamsa. The term Mimamsa really means, and I've got that on the handout, a solution to a problem by critical examination and reflection. So they were really into critical reflection and thinking about the arguments. The founder of the Mimamsa school was in 400 BC. So that's 400 years before Christ. His name is Jamini. He's the original, author of the Mimamsa Sutras, and then you get commentary by this guy called Shabara. The text we look at is a commentary by Shabara, which is Bhashya. Bhashya means commentary. Shabara Bhashya is what we're going to look at. He's in about the 2nd century AD. Mimamsa is not just one school. They separated into 2 different schools, so they disagreed amongst themselves. So you get what is called the Prabhakara version a bit later, and the Kumaril. So if you like, the chronology of the thinkers that we are looking at will start with the Jamini Sutra and the commentary by Shabara. You don't need to remember any of this, just a little bit of historical detail. And it's really, Kumaril's kind of way of spelling out that argument that's of interest here. Okay. So just before we move to looking at the Nyaya argument, the reading for today was a paper by Tabor. It's a journal article in an important journal in this area, Philosophy East and West. You might want to look at it briefly when you consider your essays, consider writing your essays over the break. If you've got nothing better to do, you might look at the journal. And you will find, if you read this whole article, it's a very good piece of philosophy. In terms of, good pieces of philosophy, there was the Chakrabarti article that we looked at earlier, which is a very short article. This is a very long article, but it's quite interesting because the argument from memory is not only important in the, Hindu-Buddhist debate, but even in the Western debate. The argument for the existence of the self that is given by the empiricists. So Locke, famously, his argument for the existence of the self, or he doesn't call it a substantial self. He doesn't have, the Cartesian notion of a self. But what is a person? His response to the question, what is a person, is in terms of memory. And this memory debate not only happens in the East, but also in the West. And so what, one of the agendas that Tabor has for himself in this paper is to give you a sense of the argument in the Eastern tradition, and then also give you a sense of the argument in the Western tradition. So if you are interested in looking, he says, or he tries to show in his paper, and I think convincingly, that you get the same trajectory of thought in the Eastern and the Western tradition. In the Western tradition, from Locke, Butler, and then Reid, the argument becomes very similar. So Locke is the first person who gave the argument from memory. Butler had some objections to it. Reid redid the argument, and you get exactly the same structure that you get in the East. There was no evidence of any exchange between the two, but you get exactly the same argument after the same kind of criticism coming, in the late 17th, 18th century. That is kind of amazing. And something that Tabor says, might be useful, and he's quoting an Indian thinker, and he says, why is it important to study diverse traditional views? He says, insight attains clarity through the study of diverse traditional views. So studying, philosophy from different points of view, from the Eastern and the Western, and comparing them, that's, kind of what the Philosophy East and West Journal does. That's the kind of articles it publishes. Is interesting because you see not only, the same ideas being expressed, but the same arguments being put forward by, people who are physically and temporally quite apart, spatially and temporally far apart. That tells you something about, the sort of universal nature of philosophy. Okay, now back to the argument from Nyaya. And Tabor has a version in his article as well at the very start on page 1. But we looked at it briefly. Let's look at it again. So I've got it on your handout. We have desires for objects that have been experienced in the past as being pleasurable. Is that premise okay with everyone? Or is there a problem? Can we desire something that we have not experienced in the past? So this premise is saying we can only have desires for those things that we have experienced as being pleasurable in the past. Now think about your own desires for a minute. Can you desire something? Is it possible to desire something that you have not experienced in the past? Okay, good idea. Any response to that? What about you hear from your friend, that was really a great experience, let's say it was skydiving. That's the one thing I really want to do, skydiving. And you form a desire to do skydiving. Is that a completely new desire? No? Why not?
It just feels that there's some sort of like analogy or metaphor going on with just knowing that it's going to be pleasurable, whether that's knowing from your own memory or knowing from a hearsay or recommendation. That's a very similar experience.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
There's some reason to think that it will be pleasurable.
Yeah, good. I mean, there is that kind of thing. You either trust your friend, I'll come to you in a moment. You trust your friend because you've done things that they've recommended as being pleasurable in the past, and you have similar pleasures. And the other kind of worry is, I'll let you go first and then say.
I was probably going to move slightly off its from it, but I was going to ask, then even regardless of experiences and that people would give you a recommendation or something, would you say the same kind of idea applies to saying that you've personally inferred that you think you would enjoy due to like kind of the content of the experience? So say, for example, say you've been bungee jumping and you enjoyed that.
Yeah.
You now might have never been told that skydiving was good, but you could infer that.
Yeah, yeah. So, yeah, that's another way of getting to, you desire things similar to those you've desired in the past as being enjoyable. So I mean, the Nyaya point is this, and just to return back to the other point. So one is that you trust your friend. You enjoyed things they've recommended before. You know, perhaps a friend recommended something, you really had a bad experience. Next time she or he says, you should go there, you think, I'm not going to do that because our tastes don't match, right? So you don't do anything blindly. If it kind of, you know, it kind of touches on something that you do remember as being pleasurable, only then. And also there is the idea that if someone is scared of heights, let's say, if someone is scared of heights and they're told, skydiving is really wonderful and you should do it, they're not going to do it. So people, tend to look for something similar in their past experiences before you can actually form a desire. I mean, the Nyaya point might seem a bit, silly to begin with, but they do have a point there that you cannot desire something that you absolutely have no idea about. If it cannot, sort of make a connection with your experience, so to say, in any sense of the word, if it can't make a connection to your past experience in any sense of the word, then it will be difficult to desire it. Remember I gave you this exercise, and I'm going to give it to you again. Try and desire blah. What's blah? No, I won't tell you anything about blah. Can you desire blah? Whatever blah is. I'm not going to tell you anything about what blah is, but I ask you all to really desire blah. Can you do it? No. It's difficult, right? You need to know something about the sort of thing before you can actually, you might, say, if you give me an extra mark, I'll desire it for you. But then it's the extra mark that you desire, not the blah. Right? It is impossible. It's a very strong point. It's impossible to form a desire for something that cannot make a connection with your past experience. What about the possibility, that I just desire new experiences? What about someone says, I like novel things, I like surprises, that's what I desire? What would you say to that?
They know how it feels to embark on something new.
Yeah. It's the surprise, it's the kick that the surprise gives them that they desire, right? Even saying I desire novel experiences, you don't really know the content of the experience, so you can't desire it. It's the kick you get from not knowing what it is that's going to happen. That's what you enjoy. So there's always an explanation. If you genuinely desire something, it's got to make a connection with your past experience. So I think, if anything, the first premise is fine. Let's look at the second one. One can't desire things that one cannot remember. I guess we've covered that. You need to have some kind of memory. And one cannot remember someone else's experiences. What about the second part of the premise? Can you remember someone else's experiences? Yeah?
You can't make influences by it. And you can maybe, someone else's experiences may appeal to you, and remind you of your experience. So if I tell you I went to a film or saw a picture that I really liked, you might think, oh, that reminds me of when I saw a film. I like that.
Yes, and I think there is also an additional conceptual point here. Memory, by its very nature, is what is called a success term, which means, you are remembering only when you rightly remember something that happened in the past. If the event did not happen, then you're often told you're misremembering. Now, you didn't actually do that. Memory, when we say I remember, that means I am right about. So that's what I mean by saying it's a success term. There are certain terms in English which work as success terms. And I'll give you other examples in a moment. When your memory is not about a past event, then people will often say, I am misremembering, or people will tell you you're misremembering. Suppose you remember, you know, you say you remember singing at last night's party. You know, actually you weren't singing at all. You were just so drunk, and someone later told you that, and so you made up this memory. Your other friends will say, no, you're misremembering. You actually were so hopeless. You couldn't have strung a sentence together, let alone sing, right? So that's the kind of thing. That's misremembering. Memory is a success term. Knowledge, similarly, is a success term. You know, if you know something, then it's got to be true. People can't know falsehoods. Then they say, you don't know. Not that, oh, I know a falsehood. If I say it's sunny outside, you're not going to say, oh, Manima, you know falsely. You're going to say, Manima, you don't know what the weather's like. You know, knowledge is another example of what it means to be a success term. It's got to be true. The thing you are remembering or the event that you know is got to be true. What about the conclusion then? You know, so we have desires for objects that have been experienced in the past as being pleasurable. One can't desire things that one cannot remember, and one cannot remember someone else's experiences. Therefore, there must be a continuously existing self. So I must have existed in the past to have that earlier experience, enjoy that earlier experience, and now have the memory. That's the Nyaya argument. So does the conclusion follow from the premises? Do you think these premises are enough to warrant the conclusion that there must be a continuously existing thing? So I must have existed in the past to enjoy that experience and now to desire it to happen again. That's the Nyaya claim. Desire shows that you must have existed. Desire, it's like this. Desire presupposes memory. Memory presupposes a continuously existing self. That's how the argument goes. You can't have desire without memory. You can't have memory without a continuously existing self that had the earlier experience and now remembers it. Yeah?
Are they trying to argue for the continuously existing self in the world? Which is to say that you come up with so let's say Plato's thought, that could also follow from the argument. And that wouldn't mean that you existed in the world before, just that you existed out of the world, you've seen formal things, and when you were born, you now know and appreciate things as you've seen it before, not in the same way as you've seen it before.
I didn't get that. Sorry, what was the thing about not in this world, being in another world?
So from the premises and the conclusion you made, you could either say that yes, you've existed before, just like you exist now, or you could say you've existed before, but not in the same way as now. You've existed more kind of as a spirit. You've seen all the forms of things. You've seen what these things are like Plato's forms or something similar.
Right.
And now you're born and you see and you recognise them, and that way you can make desires and stuff. But you haven't lived the same way
That,
before.
yeah, I mean, that would be quite fine with the Nyaya. I don't think they would have any trouble with that, because you could have been, you know, a spirit in a previous life. I mean, even though they're not saying that, you know, you need to have memories of previous lives, it is something that is possible. And also, they might say, you know, it is the same substance, right? That's what they want, the continuously existent substance, because it's the soul that's essentially you, the body, this, you know, mind, etc. Remember, for the Hindus, it's just like a set of clothes. Like you take off clothes, at the end of life, you take off this body, but the self, the soul, is, don't try it. The soul is exactly the same thing, the same substance that keeps on existing. So that just establishes their conclusion that there must be a continuously existing thing. Any other comments? So the Buddhists worry about this. They say, yes, the premises are fine, but the conclusion is too strong. Memory does not require, so desire presupposes memory, fine, but memory does not require a continuously existing thing. Memory requires, how does a memory form? So I have an experience, a really vivid experience, one of the most vivid experiences for me was, seeing 9/11 when it happened. I don't know how young you were, but, just that image of those buildings falling down and people screaming, that's very vivid in my mind. And so the Buddhist explanation is an event happens, there's a memory impression, because of the experience, there is an impression. The impression causes another thing and another thing and another thing over a period of time, and that, the same thing doesn't need to exist. The same memory doesn't need to exist. Remember, according to the Buddhist, one psychological state can cause another psychological state, can another cause. So all you have is a series of psychological states. Memory does not require the same thing existing over time. What the Hindus want to prove is that the same thing, the self, continues to exist over time. And the Buddhists say that's not a good explanation of memory, because memory can be explained by a series of similar things, a series of psychological states, one caused by another. You still have the memory, but it's not the same state. And in fact, your memories change, fade over a period of time. So the Buddhist can actually explain more.
But the Buddhists argue that as you progress through life, your memory states, or your just mental states, become more and more complex because you're having to add to the past, and it's sort of building up this.
Yeah.
And where does it stop? How does it? Why wouldn't it? When you can't remember.
You can't remember everything. So, no one here is claiming that you need to remember everything that happened. Right? Today I might remember what I had yesterday for breakfast. But if you ask me, what did you have in 2015 on, the 12th of September for breakfast? Don't expect me to answer that. I wouldn't know.
Except if you saw a photo of a meal that you took 5 years ago, you might remember it.
You might remember it.
Which means that
Triggered.
you have to still be part of the states.
Yeah.
Somewhere, where it might be really small. But wouldn't that mean that it would, you say, if you were a 70-year-old, the states would just be absolutely enormous?
Has to be absolutely enormous, but memories do fade. So it's not everything that you remember. Sometimes when something is triggered, sometimes even when someone tries to trigger it by showing you a photo, it doesn't quite come back to you in the same sort of way. You think, yes, I believe you, I can see the photo, that's me in the past, but I can't remember it. I really don't remember that day. It's not that we remember. So no one is making the claim that you remember everything. I think everyone has to accept that some memories go away. There's only limited storage capacity in our brains. So we cannot expect our brains to keep track of everything. No matter, how good you are at remembering things, you can't keep track of everything. There's only, if you ask me, maybe even later today, what is the color of chairs in this room? I wouldn't be able to tell. Blue, maybe red, maybe gray. These are the three colors I find around Monash. Because that's not something that's important to me. We're selective about the information we try and remember. If a student said to me, and one student did say to me, your last point was really confusing as I left the class. He said, I didn't get it at all. That I would remember until next lecture, because that's important to me. But if you asked me how many of us were wearing specs, I wouldn't know. I couldn't count. I couldn't tell you that. What color jackets were people wearing? I couldn't tell you that. So it's not that we take in everything, but just the fact that we remember something, right? The fact that we remember something, what does it prove? That's the issue. And we all have some memories. Important things we do remember. So let's take it as a fact that we do have memories. And we do have desire based on memories. Let's give that to the Nyaya. The point at issue is, does it prove a continuously existing thing or a changing thing can account for memory? That's what's at issue here. Do we need to accept that the very same thing continues to exist over time, or can we account for memory by thinking of changing mental states? How many of you think we can account for memory even if psychological states keep changing, but those memory impressions, cause other states. You think that? Yeah? Some people are getting convinced by the Buddhist criticism, not quite. Yeah?
Yeah, so I struggle with it. There's like I think that's definitely permissible and it's like valid, but I kind of struggle with what the differentiation then is, particularly when we're going to like structuralist and the physiological point of view. We assume that like materialism's right and like this what we perceive as a self is a product of or like neural connections and their kind of structure, which is all kind of causally
Yeah.
linked to previous perpetuations which have led to develop in that way. I see why that's not as sufficient proof of a self. Like, I think it's like an arbitrary distinction to say it's a series of causally interrelated but separate states. Because I think like that interrelation surely that doesn't mean that's like a self in itself.
Mm-hmm. So you were convinced by the Buddhist view that, you know...
I think it sounds right, but I don't see why. I don't see the distinction between having a set of causally
Yeah.
linked mental states and like I'd consider that a sufficient condition with having selfhood.
Okay, you think that's enough to say that we have a self. Okay, let me try and sort of explain this, because I think this is a very important point. This is the most important point which distinguishes the Hindu view from the Buddhist view. Here's how it goes. For the Hindu, the self is, you know, separate from mind, body, physical and mental states. It's this separate soul substance which remains the same over time. It does not change. It's eternal. It's the existence of that thing they're trying to prove. And they think that memory requires that kind of thing. And if you think a sufficient explanation of memory can be given in terms of changing states, and that's what we'll call a self, then Nyaya will say, okay, well, as long as, you know, I want something. So the debate between the two is, one is hankering after a permanent thing, the other is satisfied with something that is impermanent, something that can be replaced by other states. And that's what the distinction is. Does memory prove a permanent thing or not? No, say the Buddhists, because a sufficient explanation can be given. Now, in the newly found ways, and you know, the way you're talking is how some philosophers these days talk, some neuroscientists talk about the self as well. You know, there's reams and reams of neuroscience journals talking about the self, and they talk exactly in the way you said. You know, that's sufficient to be a self. Why do I need this continuing soul substance? That's fine. You know, that's our new way of thinking about the world. But for them, the soul substance was important, and they thought memory proved it. And if we think there is a sufficient explanation in terms of changing mental and physical states, then we have to say the Hindus were wrong. At least, you know, their argument doesn't work. So the Mamatha School takes this criticism very, very seriously. They say, yes, we can give a sufficient explanation of memory and therefore of desire in terms of changing states. So how do we respond to this criticism? And I'm going to read you the Mamatha argument, and then we will discuss it. Let's see what their argument is. It's on page 203 on the left-hand side column. So before that, what's happened in this paper is Tabor has discussed the Nyaya argument and the Buddhist criticism of it, and accepted that the Mimamsa accept the Buddhist criticism. They take it seriously that, you know, we do have a sufficient explanation of memory. We do not need to posit a continuing self. So how do they respond to it? So this is the argument at the bottom of page 203 on the left-hand side column. This is from the Mimamsa Sutra Bhashya. When a thing has been seen on one day, the notion, I saw this, arises on a later day. And this recognition, so, refers to an inner self, nothing else, that is certainly not to a collection of skandhas. Skandhas is mental and physical states that are changing. So recognition, in memory we recognize an inner self. That's what they're saying. Not just mental and physical states, because for the present collection of skandhas, for the present collection of mental and physical states is different from the one that saw the thing earlier. Hence, there is something besides the collection of skandhas to which this word I applies. Here we do not consider the word I that we employ as a means for inferring another thing besides the skandhas. So they're not giving you an argument from language. Remember, we looked at an argument from language from the Nyayas. Rather, and this is the bit to focus on, we consider the experience of recognition which goes beyond the word to be the means of the inference. For this meaning we comprehend. We perceived yesterday, we remember now. Therefore we understand that we existed yesterday and we exist today. And those things which existed yesterday and exist today, they are not such that have passed away. That is, they exist continuously from yesterday to today. So their argument, their response to the Buddhist criticism is the following. They're also going to give you an inference, right? They're also going to give you an inference to the best explanation, but their inference depends on what you cognize, what you see as the self in a memory experience. They say you recognize the same thing. When you remember something, so think about this example. A few days ago, there were quite a few rainbows. I don't know if you were walking around in the evenings. So if you saw a rainbow, if you have a vivid memory of seeing the rainbow, you not only remember the rainbow, you see yourself. You kind of remember you, the very same person, remembering the rainbow. So what the Mimamsa is saying, memory is not just remembering an object. Memory is also remembering that you yourself were seeing that experience, seeing that object. So you remember the earlier experience, not just the memory. And the earlier experience has the subject in it. So here is the content of memory. It's not just remembering the rainbow. It is something like this. I now remember that I, last week, saw the rainbow, right? When I have I now remember I, last week, saw the rainbow, and then they add this other thing, that not only this, but you also, memory gives you the proof. Memory is the proof for seeing that the I now and the I last week were exactly the same thing. They are identical. So memory, that's why they say it reveals an inner self. Not, your body has changed. Your mental states have changed. But when you remember something, now remember, try and do this for me. Remember your last birthday. I hope it was a good one, so it brings some good memories. So remember your last birthday. And think, who was there? Was it you? Not just a body, not just mental states, because if your birthday was a while ago, you've learned lots of new things in the meantime. But there is a certain recognition. So that's the claim that the Mimamsa are making. Memory reveals an inner self, because you don't just remember a certain collection of mental and physical states. You remember you being there. Remember an important experience. Your graduation at school. Who was graduating? You were graduating, right? Exactly identical person. The same thing graduated, and the same thing is sitting here today. That's what your memory of graduation reveals. Is that right? How do people feel about that? What does your memory of an important event? Think of your favorite important event, whether it's your last birthday or your graduation or whatever you'd like. Think of your favorite event in the past, and what does it tell you about who was there? Was it a bundle of mental and physical states, or was it something identical to the person sitting here? Was it something identical, you think? No? How many of you think it was the same thing, that the person that graduated is the person sitting here? You're the only one. Yeah, 2, 3, 4. What about the rest? What is the concern? Why do you think it's not the same person? Not the same identical person? Why not the same person? Who was it then? Someone similar? You think that will do? Someone similar will do? Yeah?
Yeah, because you're not, you kind of, because you've changed as a person, you might not necessarily identify with that person like you identified that that was you, but now you've grown and stuff, it might be, it's like you might have the basic fundamental similarities, but you've also changed and grown and learned things that you wouldn't have known otherwise.
Yeah. Yeah, good point. I mean, what we identify with, I mean, the way you put it is interesting, because what we identify with, you know, when we left school and what we identify ourselves with today might be slightly different things. And what each of you identified with, you perhaps never thought you would study Indian philosophy, right? Maybe when you were leaving school, that was not, you know, something on your mind, and then there is, you have changed since. But is there any sense in which it is the same person? You know, you also said something, I have changed, but there is some sense in which it is me.
Yeah, like fundamentally, I think you're the same, but it's just like your attitude and stuff might change with the person.
Yeah, and that's exactly what the Mimamsa wants. You know, the fundamentally it is the same you. And they say we can explain the change in attitudes by explaining the change in mental states. That's exactly the reason why it can't be just a mental state. It's got to be something else, because that's what they want to get at, the sense in which you fundamentally are the same person. That's what they're trying to get. They say change, they're not saying change, you haven't changed. They're saying what has changed is things, you know, you shouldn't really identify with, because mental states are not you. You are the thing that remains the same. Mental states come and go, but we tend to identify. They accept that point. We tend to identify with our mental states. But that's not really you. What we are trying to get at, what the Hindus are trying to get at, is the fundamental, you know, that recognition that it was me. Memory has that recognition.
Yeah, it's kind of hard to isolate that, because if you think about that, then you're also thinking of your body and how your body is you. Does it, like...
How your body is you, but think of an experience, you know, way back, and then your body's changed too. Yeah. Even then you think, you know, fundamentally it was me. Yes, I've lost a few cells, or I've put on a bit of weight, or whatever. You know, you might have lost some, or put on some, or have a different color of hair, all sorts of things. But the sense in which it was you, that's what the Mimamsa is trying to get at. And we all have a sense, you know, I did that in the past. Think of an important thing that you did. You know, your graduation, you did that. And the Mimamsa says there is in some sense in which you identify with that self. That's the self. That's the identity we are after. That thing remains the same. And that thing that remains the same cannot be mental states, cannot be physical states, because all those things change. But something remains the same, and that's their proof for the self. Whatever it is that remains the same from that had the earlier experience and now remembers the experience. And it's that recognition. So they say memory directly reveals that identity of me now and me then. Me now who's doing the remembering is the same as me then who graduated. And, in whatever sense it is the same as. Whatever differences me now has from me then can be explained in terms of mental and physical states. My body has changed, my mental states have changed, but there is a sense in which me now is the same as me then. And I see it in memory. When I think back to that experience, when I remember that experience, I remember walking up and graduating. I remember holding the degree in my hand. And that I could not just be mental and physical states. It's got to be something else. That's the Mimamsa view. So they say in every experience there is not just the thing. So, you not only see a chair, but there's also the self which is seeing the chair. There is also, and in memory, there is not only you who's remembering, you remember the earlier experience, and the earlier experience has this content. I then seeing a rainbow. I last week seeing a rainbow. It's a complex thing, which is the content of memory. The content of memory is not just seeing the rainbow. You see something very complex. In memory, you remember yourself seeing the rainbow. You remember yourself standing at the bus stand and seeing the rainbow. That's where I saw it. And when I remember myself, the self that I remember is not the person, not the body, but some inner self. That's what they think it establishes. And so one worry might be, does every experience have a self? I mean, I'm just experiencing chairs. Where's the self in every experience? And if we require a self in every experience, then we might be on a regress. Then we need another self to experience that thing, and another self, and another self. So one concern with the Mimamsa argument, because they say in an experience you not only see the rainbow, or you not only remember taking your degree, you remember the experience, you remember feeling a certain way, or you remember a certain feeling that someone had to that experience, and that someone was you. It's much more complex than just seeing something. And at least some of the experiences that are important are like that. And so how might one say that, this is not a regress? And I think it sometimes helps. Now, let's try this little experiment. Imagine being an elephant, each of you. Done it? Imagine being an elephant. Just imagine being an elephant. Done it? Okay, now try something else. Imagine you yourself being an elephant. Any difference in the two? When I just said imagine being an elephant, what did you do? When I said imagine you yourself being an elephant, what did you do? Anyone did anything different? No? Yeah?
In the first one, I tried to imagine being with the physical attributes of an elephant, and in the second one, tried to place myself in the environment of an elephant.
So you went further. When it was you yourself being an elephant, you took your inner self with you into the elephant's body, in some sense. Anyone else experienced a difference? Or did it seem the same? Yeah?
When I imagined being an elephant, it was more like I was trying to put myself into movements and where it would be.
Yeah.
But when myself was being an elephant, I was trying to think what an elephant would think, and obviously I can't do that.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah, it's kind of the story of that. Is like when I was trying to imagine being an elephant, I was trying to imagine the kind of elephant psychological experience where that might be. And then the second one, I was kind of trying to translate myself as I understand it to being an elephant, like my personal set of
beliefs into
Yeah.
elephant beliefs.
Values, beliefs, all that stuff. Into elephant, they didn't work out that well.
Didn't work that well. Uh-huh. So elephant doesn't really like beer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think mine was similar. Like the first one was possible. You just kind of imagine what it means to be like an elephant, try to empathise with that. And the second one was maybe impossible, even, but just difficult.
Yeah.
Because you can't be myself as an elephant. So what makes me. I can't talk to an elephant. I can't say nice things to an elephant as a human. So maybe the first one was possible, the second one.
Right. Yeah.
I was going to say, I feel like there really is no difference because when you say, imagine being an elephant, what else am I imagining as an elephant if not me, myself? Like I see no difference with you can't separate. It's just like you just took out the words yourself, but really that is what I'm imagining.
Mm.
It's not like I'm imagining having an elephant body, like it's
Yeah.
me that I'm imagining physically.
Yeah. Good. Anyone else? Imagining being an elephant? Yeah?
The other week when you said how terrible it would be to get a cooking pot,
Yeah.
I guess then we're projecting our own idea of what it would be like to be a cooking pot, putting ourselves inside the cooking pot. But a cooking pot wouldn't really have be in the same cycle as human beings, so it couldn't be all that bad. It might just be a continuous state of nothing.
Yeah. But here is imagine being a cooking pot. You can do that. Imagine being a cooking pot. And imagine you yourself being a cooking pot. Any difference between the two? We're not saying whether the cooking pot is doing the imagining or not. What we're asking is imagine being a cooking pot and imagine you yourself being a cooking pot. Any difference between these two imaginations?
Between the imaginations or it eventually happens.
Yeah, just the imagination. We're just talking about the imaginary experience. Imagine being a cooking pot, and then now imagine you yourself being a cooking pot. Any difference between the two?
I prefer it's not me.
You can't imagine yourself into being a cooking pot. That's why I thought elephants might do, because people do like elephants, and they have big memories and big brains and so on and so forth. That's why I use the elephant example. So the point here is this. Those of you who thought that there is no difference between the two, imagining being an elephant and imagining you yourself being an elephant, are agreeing with the Mamatha way of looking at things. The Mamatha way of looking at things is every experience. So, like you said, put it very nicely, you said you yourself is just added in there. It just doesn't change the experience. So, seeing a chair or me, myself, seeing a chair is no different. It's just the same experience, right? Seeing the chair, or if I add me, myself, every time I see the chair, there is me, myself, seeing a chair. Every time I imagine something, there is me doing the imagining. That's the Mimamsa point. The Buddhist point is no, these experiences, you are dragging in the self. The Buddhist thinks you're dragging in the self. So, nothing to worry about that there is disagreement in the class, because this disagreement hasn't gone away. There are still people in the journal thinking about the memory argument and trying to find, whether it works or not for the existence of the self, both in the Eastern and in the Western tradition. This debate hasn't gone away. And the fact that, in this class there is a difference of opinion, that just shows perhaps it's not going to go away. This debate is going to continue, because it is difficult to think about these issues, who gets it right. And some of what I'm going to talk about in the second half of the lecture, after you have a break, is some of the concerns with this kind of an argument, because it is very importantly, this is the last point I'll make, it is very importantly this argument depends on the first person experience, what is called phenomenology, how it feels from the first person point of view, how you experience things. That's what this argument depends on. The memory argument depends on how you experience things from the first person point of view, what it feels like. And that's, what is called phenomenology. People who do phenomenology put first-person experience first, and they say first-person experience has to be explained. So the Mamatha argument is a phenomenological argument because they say, I have this experience of remembering the same thing having the earlier experience. Me, myself, me now was having the experience last week. That's what I remember. And what do you say to someone who says, you know, that's how it feels to me? You can't take away their feeling. That's, you know, the kind of the power and the downfall of the phenomenology or phenomenological arguments. They depend on a first-person point of view. Think about this. We'll come back after 6 or 7 minutes, just after 11, and start, you know, thinking about whether phenomenological arguments can carry weight or not.